All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to Akwai's Executive Interviews. I'm going to be sitting and interviewing Mayor Jim Lane today from the city of Scottsdale. And before we get started, let's talk a little bit about Akwai. Akwai is a social networking application that's very easy to use and user-friendly. It's targeted for individuals looking to reach their own personal, professional, occupational goals. So check it out in your in-app homes and all that good stuff. But I'm Dorena Bledsoe. I am with Bledsoe Empower. I'm a licensed behavioral health professional who has teamed up with Akwai to talk more about leadership and mental health with Mayor Jim Lane. So thank you so much for taking time out to meet with us today.
My pleasure.
Yes.
Dorena, nice to meet you
And
too.
if anything, we want to really emphasize that you've been in office for 10 years now, so celebrating a decade.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and I had one term on council prior to that, but nevertheless, so I've been in the mayor's office just a little more than 10 years now.
Wow. So you have a lot to share about leadership then.
Yeah, I think there probably is a little that I can share.
Yes, that's right. Well, we met with some Scottsdale school administrators to talk more about leadership, and they had some questions to ask you. Okay, so our first person is Megan Mitrovich, the head of the head of schools at Basis Scottsdale. And her first question is, how did you get into the position that you're in today? So what was your journey?
Well, my journey really was from years in business, my own businesses, and actually working for others in a variety of things, but having most of my businesses in Scottsdale. Okay. It's my background, and from my education, it was in business certainly, but in accounting and finance. So that's how I got out here in the first place. So that good part of my journey really was in the private sector, in the business sector. As I tell people, I really had no aspirations in a political office. And as I sold, the last two companies that I owned were technology companies. I sold to a Canadian firm. And in the transition period, I had more time than I had when I was actually running it. I was transitioning them to another team, and I was going to be moving on. There's a little bit more to this story, but I worked on a committee for the mayor at the time at somebody's suggestion, and just figured I had some time to do just exactly that. Yeah. Made a little bit of a splash, I guess, in what we concluded and what we presented, or what I presented to the council on that. And so from there, folks started to ask me whether I would consider running for council.
Oh, okay.
And I became a resident expert in the particular area of that, even though I wasn't a one-issue person. My campaign really was to bring a little bit more of to bring a business approach to City Hall. City Hall is nothing more than a municipal corporation, even though there is a bit of a different structure as far as accounting and finance and some other elements as far as the control mechanisms of it. But nevertheless, it was transferable, and that's what I ran on. So that's pretty much it. And I have to throw in the fact that as running for council, before I ran for council, I certainly consulted with my wife, and I said, well, what do you think about this? And she said, well, yeah, just don't get me involved. And I said, that'd be just fine. And I promised her that I said, I sort of promised, I guess. I hate to say it. I turned that, didn't commit on that promise, but nevertheless, I said, it'll just be 4 years. And I said, I'll get back to business at hand. And so she said, fine. Well, 4 years later, I decided in order to really do the kinds of things and to move things forward in the way that I thought was positive. And of course, we're in the midst now of a great recession, or we were just about to be. I decided to go ahead and run for mayor. So that was the initial decision. I was a little bit of a dark horse in the sense that I'm coming out of nowhere. Nobody really knew me other than being on council for a short while. And so it was, and I was going up against an incumbent mayor, who was, I would say, reasonably popular. But there were some issues there that I thought needed to be discussed and to move forward.
Yeah, you made your way. You made your way. Awesome. What a cool journey. Well, what previous jobs did you have before running for mayor? I know you mentioned you had your businesses, but can you tell us specifically what that was?
Well, sure. My education was as in accounting specifically. I came out here as a CPA to work for what is now KPMG.
Oh, okay.
So I worked for KPMG as a financial statement auditor and worked my way up through the ranks there for about 6 years, as I said, and from there, I took some positions as CFO, Chief Financial Officer, for some local companies, They were in electronics in one instance, and also in material supplies and open pit mining. So I worked in that capacity for both those companies, and then I moved on to a company. Well, actually, there was a trading company for a short while that I worked for, but I was transitioning to my own company. I started a construction company and put that together and had that for 5 or 6 years and sold it off. But in that case, I had moved to the CEO president position. And then, of course, my next company really were technology companies, they're principal ones. I had a couple of other sideline companies that I was somewhat involved with. In restaurant, believe it or not, and that's not the one that I shine the light onto very much, even though I got out of it alive. But,
it's important, right?
Yeah, but, and sold it off successfully. But nevertheless, electronics company is really the thing that I got most intrigued with. Now, I'm not a technician, but certainly in the field that I was in, there's a certain amount of technology even in those areas, and had been developing. So I had an ISP, an internet service provider, and I also had a network integration company.
Wow.
And so I sold those to some Canadians, and in the transition, that's when some of the opportunities came up to do other things.
Yeah. It sounds like you got recognized pretty quickly as a leader.
Yeah, I guess it did, and from a standpoint. But I like to think about it as is just having an ability, number one, to communicate. The other is to not only to communicate, but to be defined and definite about what you need to do in certain sets of circumstances.
That's right.
And I like also think pragmatic. And in political world, sometimes being pragmatic is very difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And when I say that, it doesn't seem like they should be incompatible, but there are influences that make it different.
That's right. There's the expectation and there's the reality.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So Sam Messina, the assistant principal and athletic director at Chaparral High School, wanted to know what are a couple things you're proud of Scottsdale achieving?
Well, number one, I think the recovery from the Great Recession.
Yes.
One of the things that I did, and this may be a partial answer to it, is the first thing I came in as mayor, I had a very defined, I had run on some things, which is another thing that I've been recognized for, is doing what I said I would do when I ran. And also having a set of principles and, frankly, a governance philosophy that I just adhere to. I like to tell people, let you sleep at night when you're on that. Yes. And I also say, not everything is black and white. There are gray areas. Yes, so you need to be able to justify when you're moving in another direction, and not just for political reasons, even though there's a reality to some political situations, but to justify it. But in any case, to the point, I got
the question. What are you the pride that you have for Scottsdale?
Oh, the pride. Well, and again, I was going in the right direction on that. I initiated reforms to our charter, which is our Constitution. So one of the first things coming out of the box, I put together a plan and then initiated a task force. In order to change our charter, which is like our Constitution, we have to institute a task force, put that together, gave them some guidelines, appointed a chair to it, and of course we peopled that with a good group of people to consider how we needed to amend and adjust. I might say that the AG, before I was even on council, had dubbed Scottsdale as a culture of secrecy because of a misuse of a certain specific rules with regard to certain meetings, misuse of it. So we wanted to make sure we had greater transparency, greater accountability, and greater control on the part of the electorate or our citizens through the representative government. And that was not something that was really happening completely and not correctly, I didn't believe. So we put those and put them on the ballot, and they were passed overwhelmingly. It's not easy to have those kinds of changes made to a charter because most people say, hey, we think things are fine. But I take personal pride in the fact that I think they trusted that what I was saying was going to be useful and that there weren't going to be any adverse consequences to those. And thus far, ASU and other universities across the country are continuing to study our structure the way it is now because just to see, I think they're really just checking it out, see if it's going to work. And it's been working fine, but as I tell people, it always depends upon who you elect because anybody can denigrate from what your laws are, all kinds of things. So you need to make sure that you're not that you've got folks who are cognizant and maybe respectful of how things have been working.
That's right. It starts at the top.
And of course, we were also at the same time going through a massive downturn in our economy. We were off 35 to 40% in tax receipts. Our valuation on some properties were as high as 50%, which meant people were losing their estate monies and everything else. So we moved quickly on economic development to create a platform that was positive for business, but to make sure that we were not. Also, one of the other reforms was we do not give subsidies.
Right.
We don't pay anybody to come into town. So I'm proud of all of those things, and they've all worked to our favor. We grow, but we grow in a rate, we're not throwing accelerant on it, and frankly, throwing accelerant on it in the sense that now I'm going to give somebody some money here who's going to be in competition with somebody over here.
Right.
This person's a taxpayer, and now he is actually accommodating someone who's in competition with him in business potentially.
Right, yeah.
And so it also creates. I'm sorry to say it. I'm not implicating anybody on it, but it creates a potential area for corruption.
Right. It does. And I hear you saying that the things that make you proud is the fact that you have a team that you can rely on, that's consistent, that are willing to work together and problem solve together. And that's beautiful. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for answering that.
Sure.
Yes, a lot of pride. So now we're going to talk about my favorite part. You know, I'm biased because I'm a therapist. We're going to be talking about mental health. All right. So the first question is, why is mental health awareness important for students, teachers, and their parents?
Well, I mean, in the current environment, I think it's always been important.
That's right.
But obviously, one of the difficulties we seem to always have, we have a situation right now in City Hall on this situation, and that is protection of people's privacy, and at the same time making sure that somehow or other people are aware of a developing circumstance in mental health, negatively, of course, a negative kind of variety, and particularly where it presents a threat to others. But at the same time, it's important for everybody. You're essentially saving a life. If somebody goes through life with an undiagnosed and frankly untreated in any number of ways, a condition mentally that doesn't allow them to live a life fully, then it's essentially saving a life.
That's right.
And we probably all in our lifetime have experienced those kinds of situations with individuals, and it's tragic. It's always tragic. It could easily be as tragic, equally tragic as losing a limb or something.
Seriously,
like
yes, it is. Yes, it is. And one thing that we know is that 1 in 5 adults actually do suffer from some type of mental health condition, whether it's depression or anxiety. So how do you, in the environment that you're working in, how do you guys emphasize mental health? How do you promote it?
Well, this may sound a little simple, but from a business standpoint, just providing a positive environment. I mean, that is, and frankly, an environment that doesn't create maybe cliques and or any other things that's unsettling. We talk about politics being somewhat unsettling in cases, but there's politics everywhere. Politics is nothing more than somebody's opinion about other things. Could be anything. So we're careful and observant as far as that's concerned, and our policies and procedures with regard to how we attend to those things are positive.
Yes.
The only concern I've ever had with it is, I mentioned it just briefly, and that's part of the requirements. And this is a push-pull kind of thing, because protecting somebody's privacy is a careful road when you're passing somebody off to someone else. And there's a known condition, and that condition was part of the attributing factor for what happened to him. And all too often, the lines are too gray to define it in a clinical sense, if you will. And frankly, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and not everybody around. I play it sometimes as an armchair guy, but nevertheless, so nobody's going to take my word for it. But it even comes down to even the professionals in the field. It's not that easy a thing to necessarily. It's a bit less of a science than some other areas of medical care.
Right. You have your hard science and your soft science, which is mental health.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It's really interesting to hear how you emphasize relationships in the workplace and being able to recognize when somebody's struggling and getting them connected to a resource. It's so important with mental health. So thank you for answering those questions. So next is our segment about virtual internships. If students were to participate in a virtual internship and wanted to imagine what it is like to be the mayor, what kinds of questions should they be asking themselves on a daily basis?
You know, it's interesting. I'll start very simply in how I actually tell folks, when they're considered that's a path they want to take. And this maybe sometimes sounds a little bit more restrictive than I mean it to be, but I always say, hey, bring something to the table. You come right out of school, you're probably not ready to be leading people.
Right.
And frankly, and I don't mean to say that we're in the business of telling people what to do. That's not what we're going to do. But nevertheless,
we're guiding,
leading them, and frankly, we are executing laws and in consideration for the whole scope of things. Even the human condition of how a law may affect somebody.
Right.
And I've got a particular story to that, but nevertheless, I just say, it doesn't matter what you do in the world, but if you do it on your own, it doesn't matter whether you're a stay-at-home mom or you run a household and a family or you have a budget at home, or whether you have your own business or you work for somebody, and you communicate with people and you start to understand how to work with people.
Yes.
And I don't mean to say that the kids don't have, and very often they may be already armed with that, but in a lot of cases they're not. But really, even to understand when you're campaigning, to have people realize that you are someone who has experience at something. And I suppose, I don't know if that's sort of a nutshell answer on it, but
I think that's such a powerful answer, because what you're saying is we have to emphasize our relationships with individuals, because like you mentioned, we're not alone in this. It takes a village in a way.
But the other side of it, if I just would add in with some emphasis, the idea that if you were to be in a leadership position by election, I think everybody is likely capable of being a leader, but it's a matter of seeing how do you go about respecting people and dealing with people, understanding people, listening to people, and at the same time, you may not always agree, and you don't have to pander to all those situations, but you need to be able to communicate in a way that people are going to say, hey, I do understand where you're coming from, and you haven't dismissed my idea, but at the same time you recognize that that's what that is, but this is how things do work together, and you'll see that what you're looking for will get resolved in the same manner. Not the same manner, but maybe in a different way.
Yes, absolutely. So what are some questions that you ask yourself on a daily basis to ensure that you're being successful and fair?
What do I ask myself on a daily basis? That's a good question. I'm not sure that I pose that question to myself every day, but I do contemplate the reaction that I may have gotten, good or bad, from something that may have happened. And so in a certain sense, I sort of try to reevaluate if it was good, what made it good. This isn't a question by question kind of thing. It's just sort of a mental exercise. And what went wrong? Why did this person, not understand, or frankly, what could I have said that might have changed the result? And these aren't blow-up situations, but they're just something where somebody's not really satisfied. Now, I will say that in the world today, there is a little bit of a concern that I have on an ongoing basis of people being just generally dysphoric. And sometimes it doesn't really matter what you might even say. And particularly in a world where somehow or other it's been communicated that politicians are just simply aren't to be trusted. So I can't hardly give anybody an answer if they don't have just a basic premise that I'm another human being and that I'm not here in a malicious sense.
Here to help. Yeah, you're here to help. The stereotypes and the stigmas of politicians. It does impact the ability to be able to connect with another person and really send your message off to be clear and well understood. So I like that you point that out. Right, and it happens with counselors as well, right? They come up to me, there's already that stigma of you're here to analyze me.
Well, it happens in all relationships, it really does. But when there's a
Sure.
general notion that politicians aren't to be trusted, that they're all liars,
Right.
I often tell people, if that's the way you feel, why are you even asking me something?
That's right. That's right. And let's go from there. Let's go from there. Awesome. Very cool. Very cool answers. So, what are some mindsets? What type of mindset does an individual or an attitude does an individual need to have to be in the position that you're in?
Well, another just a generic type of term, but it's more meaningful than it might be taken sometimes. And to be a people person, basically you almost have to have grown up liking people.
Yes.
You know?
We hear that all the time too. I don't want to be around people, but you have to be in that type of mindset.
Yeah, and so in this particular role that I've been in, and frankly even in the business world, it's not that much different from this. I mean, you have to be a business, you have to be a people person. Yeah, you do have to be a business person in the business world and think along those lines as well. But you need to be able to bring those elements together. But the first and foremost thing is generally got to like people.
Yes.
And you generally have to trust people.
Yes.
Doesn't mean we don't all get stung a time or two.
Right.
But you can't go away embittered and spend the rest of your life not trusting anybody again.
Right,
You know, and so somehow you've got to give people the benefit of the doubt the first time out of the box. Maybe even a second time.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, you take it as a learning opportunity. Yeah, absolutely. These are some great answers, Mayor. Thank you. Now, if I were to create a virtual internship for students, what benefits do you think they would take from participating in it?
Well, I think what we're discussing right now is essentially what you'd like to communicate, and that are what are the important aspects of leadership, of holding a position like that. And you need to know where you stand before you go in. It doesn't mean you're hard and fast and you don't have any wiggle room on anything. I mentioned before, not everything's black and white, but you need to explain when you depart. But it's nice to have a sort of a set of principles that guide you and ideals that guide you. But you need to know yourself before you try to get in and say anything about what other people are to do.
Right, absolutely. Self-awareness is key, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's major. It is major. Alrighty. So now we're going to move into talking more about your business and feedback that you can give other business entrepreneurs or small business owners like myself, right? So you ran a business for a long time. It sounds like you sold multiple businesses as well, very successful. So can you talk about what kinds of companies you were able to hand off to different companies? Because you mentioned something about your accounting business and handing that off to somebody else or selling it.
I worked for a large firm,
Okay.
KPMG, in the accounting world, and was chief financial officer for some companies that I really had no ownership in.
Okay.
And so
Gotcha.
those were certainly learning experience in each and every case, but nevertheless, that was a transition into when I ultimately became COO. I ran a regional airline. I had a small interest in that as well. So I ran that for several years, but nevertheless, I worked up from a CFO position to the COO president position in that, by virtue of some financial situations that we were able to remedy. But I think from the business world, and I think we're still talking about what are the component parts that are important in a successful business.
Yes.
I'm a numbers guy, basically. So I'm going to tell you that knowing your numbers, knowing them yourself personally, and if you don't have that background, get the background somehow or other from somebody you trust. I think that's a critical component, and it's also is a way to measure yourself.
Yes.
Simple sales, and oftentimes people just buy sales. But there's more to it. You can sell yourself into a financial grave.
Right.
So I mean, it's a combination of talents, and there's got to be respect between both sides.
Yes.
If there's ever an area that I had to sort of tackle, it was when the sales department, even as a CFO, the sales department and finance did not see things in the same vein as to what was going to move the company forward. Whether it was the particular service or product that you were producing, whether that was going to be positive for you, or whether it was just the cost basis and how you were how you were pricing it, saying, hey, this is a great product, but we can't sell it for 10 cents. It costs us 50 cents to make it.
Right, yes.
And so it's either, something's got to give. And if we could have huge sales at 10 cents, but we're losing at everything that goes out the door. In the airline business, it was interesting because you used to have load factors on the seats on the aircraft, and you had a break-even load factor. But some airlines that were in existence at the time that are no longer in existence for the very reason that they undersold the seats that they went out to try to build volume. But they undersold them to such an extent that every flight that flew out, whether it was full or not, was a loser.
Right.
So they literally sold themselves into the financial grave. So, but it's not as uncommon or unique as you might think. But it's that balance really in the elements, making sure you've got good people, you keep good people, and that you have an overview as if it's your company, that you have an overview of each of the areas and understand and respect that. The other is keeping good records all the way around also enables you to be able to sell it.
Right. Okay.
When that time comes, if you have an exit strategy on that one. Yeah.
So we need to know our numbers, we need to have good people, we need to keep good people, and then we need to know our business plan is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay.
And that business plan does incorporate all the other elements that work into how that, whether it's manufacturing and it's who's actually building it, quality control, all of those things. But sales and finance are a big element. Finance is a big element, but cost accounting really in a manufacturing. But each and everything comes at a price. You make sure your pricing is.
That's right.
And frankly, that fits in the marketplace.
Yes, if there's a need.
So if your costs are just too high, you can't sell it. You're going to have to reduce your costs.
Yeah.
If the marketplace tells you, hey, it really does sell for 10 cents.
Now your whole business plan has been changed. Golly. Okay. So what advice would you give somebody who is looking to start up a business and sell it in the future?
Well, you mentioned a business plan, and number one, the old saying, and frankly, I hope I've got that right. I don't employ it much anymore, but nevertheless, failure to have a plan is a plan to fail.
That's right.
And so having a plan of what your strategy is. Is your strategy to sell? Is your strategy to retain?
Right.
And not to say that there's a whole different lineup of things that you would do one versus the other. You're going to want to make sure you've got good solid crew. And your facilities, your costs are in line, and that you've got a book of business. I mean, it depends upon the business you're running, but nevertheless, that's often a common way you refer to it. So even if you're going to sell it, the only thing that I found when I was up against competitors is keeping really good records, something that people could trust.
Yes.
And understanding that, you're not, in smaller companies, you're not skimming, you're not saying, hey, this is worth, which is illegal, of course. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just saying sometimes in some businesses it happens, and when they go to sell it, say, hey, my tax returns really don't reflect, and that may be the only financial record they have, but they don't really reflect what I'm doing. Right away, a potential buyer, red flags ought to go up.
Right, yes.
Because
Yeah, that's true.
So I would say the only difference is between the two strategies, the two plans. If you're going to develop an exit strategy, just always be mindful that to protect your business and make sure it's everything is on the straight and narrow.
You are motivating me to update my vision board right now. I love it. Thank you for all this feedback. It's really good advice, too, for myself having a small company and getting started. You're getting me motivated. So we were talking about your own passions and hobbies. What are they?
Well, I'd have to say, number one, my major passion, I suppose, has always been business, and right now it is technology.
Okay.
And so I'm looking really as maybe as in a future sense of getting back involved with that. But I'd say my passions and my hobbies have changed through the years. When we were raising kids, we were big boaters and skiers and that type of
cool.
thing. Now I've gotten away from that for a number of reasons, and hiking and camping and that. And one of the things I stayed away from, and it's somewhat odd for a mayor of Scottsdale to say, and frankly for most business people, I suppose, is that I've never been a golfer, really.
Really?
When I was in college, a little bit, never had a real passion for that. And so I've taken up hiking, I've done tennis, I like to swim a lot.
Okay.
And so those are the. But passion is sort of an interesting one. I don't necessarily look at it quite the same way as some golfers might see it as far as a passion.
Yes.
But nevertheless, so I've directed some energies in a little bit different place. And actually now, my wife and I are getting at a point where we like to do a lot more travel. We like to spend time with our grandkids, and there's a very different level of passion.
Right.
And frankly, helping and working with. We don't. They're all on their own, doing very well. All of our kids with their families, but we like to be part of that as much as possible. So that may sound a little mild on things, but nevertheless, it's just. Like I say, you somewhat evolve through the course of things. I will tell you that a back injury not too very long ago set me away from a number of things that I was doing. But I'd like to say I'm fully recovered, but so
it changes up what you can do.
Yeah.
I hear you on that. I used to play basketball in college, and after 2 knee surgeries, I've had to change up how I do self-care. So would you say visiting with your family, spending family time, are some ways that you de-stress or you relax?
Yeah, and we've got a place up north, so we like to see it as a major retreat for us.
Yes.
And frankly, here's a passion of sorts, and that's reading.
Okay. What are you reading now?
Well, right now I've got about 3 books in process, but nevertheless, Team of Rivals, which is it's a historical fiction actually, but it's very close. But it's about Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet. I put it together. I love those kinds of books. In any case, I'm an informal student of history, and so there's another little bit of a passion in that. So I read a great deal about that, and also things that I learned from.
Absolutely. I like that. I like that you're reading things that are still related to politics, but teaching yourself in a way.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I really like that. So pretend that you come across someone who says they don't have any passions or hobbies. What would you encourage them to do? How would you encourage them to find something?
I think that it depends upon if you're just looking to relax with that passion, or whether you're looking to exercise your body, or whether you're looking to expand your mind. You need to determine what are the things that you want to get from that hobby.
Right.
And so I would say determine that first.
Yes.
And it could be reading. It could be taking a history class. It could be taking a class.
Right.
I like to think that everybody would be well served to learn something every day. And so it's just whether it's a better swing in golf or otherwise, it could be any number of things. But learning something every day is sort of a neat thing, and you can do that with communicating to people. And there's a whole matter of sources now that are available to you to learn something every day if you want to expand your mind.
That's right.
And it's a sense of accomplishment when you do.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I like how you pointed out that mind-body connection too, right? Getting your body moving, whether it's exercise or maybe going on a walk. So these questions pertain to adult community engagement. What does community engagement mean to you?
Well, it could mean any number of things. I mean, community engagement really could be through your church, or it could be through other foundations. It could be engaging in commissions or boards with the city, or charitable events, volunteering your time at different things. It could also mean running for office.
Right.
And so it's But as we were talking about before, I think there's a progression there. And so community engagement at all kinds of different levels teach you or can give you the kinds of communication, the kinds of sense of other people's sensibilities. I think it's important, though, to try to be as rounded as you can, not just find yourself in one place with one group of people that are thinking one way.
Right.
So it's all in a matter of learning different perspectives and that. So I think that community engagement is good, and it's a progressive thing, but to be a little bit more diverse in the kinds of things that you might entertain.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Diversifying your sources of support.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. What are some benefits of volunteering and altruism?
Well, there's a basic deal. When you give, you really do receive a sense of good, and that's why it's always been important to me that the government doesn't take people's ability to be charitable away from them by taxing them and then giving. It's a matter of people who you want to continue to develop in a successful society a desire to. I'm not even that crazy about the term give back, but nevertheless, to provide for those who are in need, where you find yourself in a better position. But it's that sense of charity that really gives you a better feeling about yourself and a commitment to your community and to your other people.
Yeah. If you're able to support someone else, then do it. We support that, right? Yes, absolutely. Now, in closing, what are some organizations or people that you want to give a shout out to for being a part of the City of Scottsdale and supporting the City of Scottsdale?
Well, that's interesting because we have a number of civic organizations that play major roles with the City of Scottsdale, and the Charros are one of those. But there's also Scottsdale Leadership, and there's even the Chamber that are engaged in a positive way, and not just in always. When I say a positive way, it's not always self-serving kind of way.
Right.
It's a means to help people in Scottsdale get more educated, to be more community-minded, all of those things. I would say those three, and there frankly there are many others. We're blessed as a community for the number of people and organizations that are interested in what goes on in Scottsdale and helping to make the environment good for everybody.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And our last question for the day, which local business or community leaders should we interview next? Who do you think is going to be running up behind Mayor Lane?
Well, if you're talking about the City of Scottsdale, there will be an election in a little over, about a year and a half now. Of course, it'll start taking place next year, 2020, for the 2021 cycle. And so there's a number of people who are running for office. I'm not sure I would want to take a position with one or the other, but when I say that, they can't actually announce, and I couldn't announce them right now because they would have to resign.
Right,
They have to wait a while, and so I wouldn't put them on the spot as far as that's concerned. But there's some good people. There have been some people that, frankly, are newly energized to be more community-minded and to take up city government. Unfortunately, it was born of some disagreement on a major issue, but at the same time, and so some of them are sort of single issue people with one perspective on things, and so sometimes that makes it's a little more difficult sometimes as they get into office to realize there are other legitimate points of view on some things. So, but I think we're working our way through that. There's been a sort of a major kumbaya moment for a bond issuance that we're running right now, which is going to be an important one for us in November.
Right, absolutely.
Given the economic downturn, folks were, and we frankly didn't want to get into that too very much if there were things we could defer. We weren't looking to get onto new. But we've put off some capital improvements and infrastructure projects that we need to attend to. And we've got the community right now, and I think we'll hold true all behind it. When I say the community, the people who are liking to drive it, who could take up arms against it one way or another. you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if anything, it's great to hear about all of the changes and the progress that you've been able to influence with the city of Scottsdale, all the people that have helped you, and all the people that you've been able to help, in full circle, be able to get to this place of success and leadership. So thank you so much for taking the time out to meeting with me. And on behalf of Akwai, thank you so much. Man, what a great time getting to know you.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and it's been nice to get to know you and Sam and the crew. It really is very nice to be here with you.
Yes.
And I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. We're trying to make change just like you.